In 1850, Kashmir's hand-loom weavers numbered 500,000. By 1905, fewer than 5,000 remained. We're documenting how an entire skilled economy vanished in a single lifetime. In 1850, a Kashmiri weaver could feed a family of 6 on the sale of a single pashmina shawl. The mountains around Srinagar held 500,000 people whose hands knew only one trade: the transformation of Himalayan wool into fabric so fine it could pass through a wedding ring. These were not factory workers. They were artists bound to wooden looms by apprenticeship, family legacy, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. A master weaver required 7 years of training before touching the finest threads. The shawls they made, called pashminas or sharush, commanded prices in London drawing rooms that rivaled small estates. Kashmir's valleys hummed with the sound of 500,000 looms. The industry employed not just weavers, but carders, dyers, embroiderers, traders, and merchants across a supply chain that reached from the high Ladakh plateau to European auction houses. In the 1840s alone, Kashmir exported over 8,000 shawls annually to Britain and France. Entire villages existed for the loom. Children learned the craft before learning to read. Grandmothers taught daughters the 17 distinct weaving patterns unique to each region: Srinagar weave, Amarnath weave, each recognizable to connoisseurs. The shawl was not merely commerce. It was identity, inheritance, and proof of mastery. A family's reputation lived in the regularity of their selvage, the evenness of their pile. And then, between 1850 and 1880, something arrived in European warehouses that would transform this world completely. British textile factories, powered by steam, driven by capital, unconstrained by tradition, began producing shawl-like cloth at 1/10 the cost. But here is what matters: the British machines did not just compete. They copied, they imitated, and they flooded the very markets that had made Kashmir wealthy for centuries. In 1850, a Kashmiri shawl cost more than a London townhouse. By 1880, the price had collapsed so completely that weavers were burning their looms for firewood. The mechanism was not subtle. British textile mills in Lancashire and Yorkshire had reverse-engineered the paslina shawl, the hand-knotted wool that had taken Kashmiri artisans 6 months to complete. In 1838, jacquard looms were adapted to mimic the intricate patterns. By 1860, British factories were producing cashmere shawls in 6 weeks. They were thinner. The dyes were wrong, but they cost 1/10 the price. The colonial administration helped. Governor-General Lord Dalhousie's 1850 tariff policy removed duties on British textile imports into India while maintaining high taxes on Kashmir's finished goods entering Britain. A Srinagar master weaver competing against a Lancashire mill faced a rigged market. The math was impossible. William Moorcroft, the East India Company's resident in Kashmir from 1823, had warned London about this exact scenario. His reports survive. He wrote, "If British manufacture enters freely, the native industry cannot survive." London filed the warning away. Profit was the only math that mattered. By 1870, the industry had already begun its death spiral. The Maharaja of Kashmir, Ranbir Singh, attempted rescue measures: subsidies, quality controls, design competitions. None worked. You cannot compete with an opponent who controls both the production technology and the trade rules. In 1875, the Kashmir Chamber of Commerce filed a formal petition. They named a number: 200,000 weavers already displaced. They begged for tariff protection. The British Viceroy's office never responded. The petition is archived in Srinagar. No one in London was listening because, by then, someone in Manchester had already begun calculating what happened when an entire skilled workforce simply had nowhere else to go. Between 1850 and 1900, 500,000 people simply stopped weaving. The collapse was not gradual. It was arithmetic. In 1850, Kashmir's shawl looms employed roughly 500,000 artisans across the valleys, Srinagar, Anantnag, Baramulla. By 1875, that number had halved. By 1890, fewer than 50,000 remained at their looms. By 1905, only 5,000 master weavers could be counted. The industry did not decline. It evaporated in a single human lifetime. The mechanism was simple and devastating. British mechanized mills in Lancashire and Yorkshire began mass-producing cheap imitations of the Kashmiri pashmina shawl in the 1840s. They were crude. They were not hand-knotted, but they cost 1/10 the price. British trade policy then flooded colonial markets, India, Egypt, the Ottoman territories, with these factory copies undercutting traditional weavers who could not match the speed or price. A hand-loom artisan in Srinagar could produce one supreme shawl in 3 months. A Lancashire loom produced dozens in a week. The villages emptied systematically. Srinagar's weaver quarters, once dense with the sound of heddles and shuttles, fell silent street by street. Workers abandoned their looms and migrated to cities seeking any wage labor. Some moved to Lahore, others to Bombay. Many simply disappeared from colonial records entirely. The death rate spiked in rural Kashmir between 1880 and 1900, though British administrators attributed it vaguely to fever, a category that masked malnutrition and despair. No government intervention occurred. No retraining. No compensation. The British East India Company and later the British Raj treated the collapse as a natural market correction, not a policy choice. The shawl workshops that had stood for 3 centuries were torn down or left to rot. The dye vats were abandoned. The pattern books were scattered. By 1910, the knowledge of how to weave a true Kashmiri shawl existed nowhere except in the hands of a vanishing few, and in one place that no one expected would become the keeper of a dead art. By 1905, Kashmir's weaving halls stood empty. 500,000 livelihoods had vanished in 50 years. The villages that had hummed with the sound of looms for centuries fell silent. Men who had known nothing but the craft faced a choice: migrate to cities, turn to agriculture on land they didn't own, or watch their children forget what their hands had learned. The British census recorded the collapse with bureaucratic precision. In 1850, Kashmir employed roughly 500,000 weavers across the valleys. By 1900, that number had fallen below 50,000. By 1905, fewer than 5,000 remained. The speed was catastrophic. No transition, no retraining, no safety net. Entire families dispersed. Some weavers moved to Lahore or Delhi, seeking factory work that paid a fraction of what hand-loom wages had been. Others abandoned the craft entirely. In Srinagar's old quarters, the Kanka, the Zadable, the sounds changed. No more shuttle clack. No more the rhythmic voice of the loom. Instead, silence and the sound of departure. The British, meanwhile, sought to explain what had happened. They called it progress. They called it inevitable. They said mechanization was the future, that hand labor could not compete, that this was how economies evolved. The narrative was clean, impersonal. It erased the actual human cost, the weavers who aged without work, the children who never learned the craft, the knowledge that died with each master who had no apprentice to inherit it. What the British did not say, what colonial records buried, was that this outcome had been engineered. Tariffs, trade agreements, and patent protections had been deliberately structured to favor Manchester mills over Kashmir looms. The market had not spoken. Policy had. Yet by the early 20th century, a peculiar hunger emerged among European collectors and museums, a hunger for the very thing they had destroyed. A Srinagar family named Mirza still owns looms. Not many. 3, perhaps 4, depending on the season and what owns means when your workshop exists mostly in photographs now. The Kashmir Government Craft Development Institute was founded in 1958, a century after the collapse began. Too late to save an industry, but not too late to document what remained. Their archives hold samples, paslina shawls from the 1880, each one a fossil of extinct labor. The weave density alone tells you why machines could never quite replicate them. Why they still cost more than a car. Museums in London, New Delhi, and Srinagar collectively hold perhaps 2,000 Kashmiri shawls from the height of production. The Metropolitan Museum has 7. The Victoria and Albert has 43. These are the survivors, the ones rich enough to be saved, old enough to matter, foreign enough to be valued. What we know, the industry employed 500,000 people in 1850. By 1905, 5,000 remained. By 1947, when partition fractured the region, perhaps 300 weavers still practiced the full technique. Today, fewer than 50 can weave a classical paslina shawl from raw wool to finished piece. The knowledge is alive. Barely. The Craft Institute trains young people. Numbers fluctuate. Interest waxes. But the economic math hasn't changed since 1890. A hand-loomed shawl takes 4 months to complete. A factory produces 50 in a day. One family's inheritance cannot compete with global supply. What remains is a question disguised as a workshop. And in 2019, a British Indian entrepreneur named Oais Hussain visited the Mirza family with an unexpected proposal. What if the very thing that killed Kashmiri weaving, global markets, wealthy collectors, heritage nostalgia, could resurrect it? What if the machines that destroyed the industry could save it? A mastercraft that took centuries to perfect was erased in decades by machines and empire. Another file is already open, the collapse of Lyon's silk weaving. If lost histories matter to you, join the archive.